Good morning. Is it a symbol that the fog cleared, the rain went away, and the sun is out? It speaks to women's role in history, that we bring sunshine and light to all that we do. So glad to see all of you. We've talked to most of you on the phone, and we are just thrilled to be here, and it's been a tremendous partnership with the Maryland Women's Heritage Center and the program coordinator, working with Mayor Moyer and Karen and Gelke, who've done a phenomenal job in putting the tour together. I want to call Wilhelmina Barres, who is our Heritage Center tour liaison, who has a small presentation.
Good morning. We're just delighted to see so many of you here. The best part of this tour is that you're going to be with us. And so many months of planning have gone into this, and I cannot tell you how wonderful it is that the first woman mayor, Mayor Moyer, has been so wonderful and gracious to let us come here and to even help us with our trolley transportation. I give you Karen. Oh, do not leave us. We need you now.
What a delight working with wonderful women on this past few months to put together this tour. And we're so glad to see you all here. I see some Annapolitans who are quite outstanding women in their own right. So my hat's off to you and others in the audience who live in this wonderful city. We're very, very honored today to host the Maryland Women's Heritage Center. I want to talk a little tiny bit about our mayor, who's been dedicated to the betterment of her adopted city for over 40 years. Following a career with the Maryland Council of Girl Scouts and the Maryland State Teachers Association, she has served terms as Alderman representing Eastport, the Maritime Republic of Eastport, where we will be traveling today. They don't have their border guards on at the moment, so passage is free across the bridge. And then Ellen was elected 2 terms as mayor, the first woman to lead the city in 300 years. Her international reputation as a leading environmentalist has positioned Annapolis as one of the premier innovative municipal communities in America. Ellen Moyer.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you this morning. Let me just give you a couple of minutes of the tour of this City Hall, which is an historic building, first built in 1761 floor, not the second floor, which wasn't built until after the Civil War in the 1860s. It was occupied by the troops and not left in very, very good conditions. However, it was an assembly room, and it was here that people gathered to dance and to play cards and to have a good time. And probably this was pretty much like what it looked like on the first floor when it was built. The signers of the Declaration of Independence from Annapolis are over here. Their homes are still in the city. They are still used, and on the back table there is a brochure from Declaration of Independence that talks about our signers. When you came in, I gave you a gift, which really is our flag. And it is, you know, you wear this, you are an ambassador for your capital city, because this is your capital city in the state. It represents Queen Anne's crown. Queen Anne was the monarch in England in 1708, and when the city was given its royal charter, and it represents a Scottish thistle and a Tudor rose, which were, in fact, the symbols of the 2 families that made up the monarchy at that particular time. So this is our flag and our recognition of who we are. Let me just say a couple of words before I talk about all the environmental initiatives in this city. You know, somebody said, well, what's it like being mayor? And it's wonderful. That is absolutely true. The mayor of this city is one of 3 full-time mayors in the state and is by charter the CEO. So, you know, I guess the buck always stops, if you will, with me. But let me also say to you that, you know, gender bias is also very much alive. And while I, at one time, was the executive director of the Commission for Women, I think I do recognize gender bias. And as much as I hate to say it occasionally, I will send a guy to talk with a guy, because I think we will get further on that particular issue than if it is me. Let me just give you one example of hundreds that I could give you, but just one that I think illustrates that. And that is, because I've become a favorite cartoon character for the local paper. And if I really wanted to, you know, take all the 30 or 35 some cartoons and put them against the senator or the speaker of the House, they might have one or two over the same period of time, but not the same number. However, Annapolis is, by virtue of lots of things, part of the Homeland Security Network. We have an equal status with Baltimore City and the 5 urban counties surrounding it. So our 7.2 square miles is a part of that network. Under Homeland Security, there's X number of dollars that come. This is the process. They come to the region, and then all of the emergency management people get together. They're all guys, and they look at the list that says this is what you can get with these monies, and they determine what would be good for the region as a whole. Well, the first thing that they looked at was a guy truck, very special truck. You can't shoot the tires out, those kinds of things. And when it was time to give it away, all of the 7 jurisdictions that got a truck gathered at the State House, and Governor Ehrlich then gave out the keys to the people to drive them away. And Annapolis was, of course, the first one. And so I didn't drive it, but I got in and we drove away. So the next day, of course, there was a cartoon, and then there was an editorial about why would we take this at all? Why didn't we take the money instead? We didn't need this. No mention, of course, of the governor or the other 6 jurisdictions, and or the fact that Homeland Security was the president's program. And the fact is, you had to take what you had to take. You couldn't take the money and give it up to someone else. So no investigation of the dollars, but great fun, poking fun at me, which I doubt they would have done. Can't prove it, but I doubt they would have done had it been a native mayor. So let's talk a little bit about green. When you came in, I gave you this wonderful little lead flashlight. PJ says Annapolis is green, and in fact, we are. We have some of the most progressive legislation in the state on every aspect, if you will, of the environmental issues. And this isn't new for us. Now, there's a great green bandwagon out there now, but this is not new. We started, I guess I started, really back in the times of the Keep America Beautiful program. That was part of Baker Johnson's program. And we developed a plan for the city, one that would help us ensure that the city was park-like in the way it felt, in the way it looked. That was back in the 1960s. And so there were a number of things that I did that I helped to initiate when I was then the First Lady of the city. And those are things like low street and parks that, you know, our streets went down to the water, and they were therefore public property, but they were not usable. But now we have 19, 20 street and parks around the city, and the University of Maryland 40 years ago helped us design some of them. Several of them have been redesigned to meet the standards, environmental standards for today. But that was an initiative, as well as tree planting, that we started way back in the 1960s. When I became an alderman in the 1980s, I passed legislation that protected our tree canopy. That was more than 20 years ago, and as a result of that, we have a 42% urban tree canopy, which is the highest in the state. Not sure we would have had that if we hadn't committed to protect our tree canopy by replacement trees. We plant about 1,000 trees a year now, little, they'll grow up and be big and furnish more. I had also been very active and participated with recreation board, and so we did a plan that was called Parks and Paths for People Plan, which won a national award for the process in terms of its development. It had to do with access to small areas where people could play, park-like places, the trail system that went around the city, and that plan has been implemented, and they're now on part 2. We also, had an open space. Is that a fire alarm? We also instituted more than 20 years ago a conservancy. We're the only public urban land trust in the country. They're worked up only in, I think, Rhode Island, but I don't think they're functioning anymore. And so through that process, we have a conservancy board, and we've been able to retain over 200 acres of parcels, small and large, but nevertheless, that have kept, you know, kept things open. And those were done, you know, 20 years ago. We have a Greenscape program, which is a volunteer program in which 1,000 people participate, going on 20 years. And it's not about cleaning up, you know, which a lot of the Earth Day programs are. It's about planting. It's about planting trees and about planting gardens. Landscape architects are available to help people design their things in their neighborhoods should they so choose. And so we have 2 times. The basic one is the 3rd Saturday in May, Greenscape Day. The city, originally it was all volunteer, meaning volunteer dollars. You had to apply to the Chesapeake Bay Trust or other places to get your dollars. Now we match $300 with every community association. There are usually 70 projects that are done, and then in the fall we buy lots of daffodil bulbs. Some tulips, girls like tulips, so you have to be careful where you plant them, and they are planted in the fall around the city, and so each year we expand what is a garden-like park to the city. We have a number of small parks besides street end parks. We have what were called back in the 60s best pocket playgrounds, you know, little bitty places on streets that are garden places, just places to sit. And you may see those as the bus goes around town. We are the very first urban open space grant came into the city. You're going to go over to the Annapolis Maritime Museum, that city property. It was purchased with 6 different grants, but the first open space grant in an urban environment went into the purchase of that waterfront property, and it was here in Annapolis that happened. From there you can take cruises at the Thomas Point Lake, kind of an icon of the bay, which you can see back there in the glass case. It is owned by the city. We took title to it. Controversial as that was by some people, that was going to cost us an arm and a leg. It's cost us nothing. It is modeled after Newport, Rhode Island, which is a lot of similarities to us, who own the Rhode Island light, and it's managed by other people. And in 30 years they've owned it, they've never spent a dime other than controlling the title so that nothing bad can happen to that one-of-a-kind and last group of lighthouses that we have in the city. I created a department of neighborhood environmental protection. They are an enforcement arm, but they are also, we are really very big into energy efficiency, so that we have done a number of things. We measured our carbon footprint not only for city buildings, but for the city as a whole. So we know what our carbon footprint is, what we need to do to bring it down. We have a very innovative program called Annapolis Easy, which is a loan program that is done with private partnership, not with public dollars. And April 2nd, I believe, is the inauguration date. People can come in, ask for an energy audit, borrow money, and somebody to guide them through all the processes for getting this money to help them reconstruct their home with solar panels or thermal energy or with other things that can help them reduce their carbon footprint. We have green building legislation. Silver LEED, all new buildings have to be, is instituted and became effective January 1st, stronger in Montgomery counties and in Washington, D.C., who are the ones you hear about. Because believe me, you will hear nothing about the environmental initiatives of this city in the local paper. Back in Back Creek, we have a very innovative ecotech park, one of a kind, that demonstrates stormwater, what happens to stormwater under different circumstances. It has every kind of environmental aspects, deep bank, what are the most innovative things you can do relative to controlling, runoff. It has lagoons. It has a green roof. It's an historic building. It has rain gardens, which we now have about 80 in the city. We are the first community to do an urban watershed plan. That tax basically focuses on lots of things, but one being reducing the impervious surfaces to pervious surfaces, which we have done both at the Naval Academy, in their resurrection of the stadium that now has rain gardens and has reduced some of its impervious surface, pervious. The dock, when we redid it, to the extent that we could, we developed rain gardens down there. We have solar panel trees, trash cans. I've left out an armful of things, but the strongest legislation related to every aspect of the environment you can find in this city. We are indeed a microcosm. We have people trained by Al Gore on climate change, so that they have taught them that their commitment is they could talk to 10 other groups, and that's 5 times 10, 50 groups that have heard that message. I don't know. All I can say is, you've got this little pin, this little light, because Annapolis is green, because we are. And we believe that we are a model, both for stormwater runoff, both for energy efficiency, both for tree canopy, and any other measure that you want to consider relative to the environment. We believe we are a model and are quite willing to share our stories and how you can get started for teeny dollars, just with community enthusiasm, people working together to make a difference. We're willing to share that with any of the cities or towns or the local governments that you participate in, or the community groups that you represent. We think we've got a good message of how to move forward. Now I see Karen saying, now it is time, so, I'll be glad to answer questions as we go along on this trip, because I know I certainly left out a lot of stuff.
Well, it's really fun to hear from women. Again, I love men. Get me wrong, but it's quite interesting. Those of you who saw the film The Duchess, about Georgiana the Duchess of Devonshire, realize that women in politics are not new. Definitely women funders of politics are not new, but they haven't really been in the foreground as much as men through the centuries. Our next speaker, Arlene K. Berlin, is a public relations, fundraising consultant, and a published writer who has worked with small businesses, nonprofit organizations, political candidates, state and local governments, artists, and graphic designers. Arlene has been involved in raising money, yay, for political candidates at the local, state, and national level since the 1960s. She was a partner in a DC public affairs firm in Washington in the 70s and played a strategic role in creating the first nationwide trade association for women business owners. It was known as NAWBO, the National Association of Women Business Owners. She wanted to help women business owners play a role in influencing public policy. And so she founded and co-chaired the first national $1,000, which was a lot of money back in the 70s, donor women's political fundraising organization known as the Women's Council, and it's now known as the Leadership Council for the Democratic National Committee. She was greatly involved in the efforts to increase membership on the 5,000 and 10,000 donors. I don't know why my mouth is broken. She's a dear friend. I'm sorry, I'm messing this up here. Arlene's been the only woman to serve on, was the only woman to serve on the finance board of directors for the National Democratic Committee in the 80s, and she was appointed finance vice chair of the Democratic National Committee in 1983, and spearheaded national programs to bring former donors back to the party. She's traveled all over America, raising millions and millions of dollars for political teams, and I'd like to introduce Arlene K. Berlin.
Can I ask how many of you ladies are from Baltimore? Oh, well, then, half my speech you might understand. Naturally, I didn't start out as finance vice chair of the party. I grew up in Baltimore City back in the olden days when Tommy D'Alessandro was mayor. My first husband was very friendly with the second Tommy mayor, and we used to go to his house on Annapolis Street. And no, I didn't meet Nancy Pelosi then, but I did meet her years later when she was the chair of the state of California, and I didn't realize she was a D'Alessandro because I met her as a Pelosi, and I found out a year or so later. Anyway, I was very active with both my first husbands in local politics, and then during the late 60s, there was the Mount Royal Democratic Club in the 2nd District was where Wally Erlinsky and Julian Lapidus, and we were also members of the Young Dems with Steny Hoyer, Goodlay Byron, who has Pale Storm, Van Carden, and we were all involved in Paul Sarbanes' first campaign. When the Vietnam War was going on, a lot of what they call New Democratic coalitions were forming, and my husband said, I'll stay with the Mount Royal, keep communication lines open, why don't we go with the NDCs, which I did. Reluctantly, and then I found myself membership chair of the chief fundraiser, along with another gal. Anyway, then I moved to Chevy Chase and started a public affairs business, also a small insurance agency, and also a few years later I had an art gallery on Prince George Street called the Winter Market. I sort of fell away a little bit from the political world, but then Steny decided, Moyer decided to run for governor, and I said, well, I would try to put together a statewide group of professional businesswomen and raise money for him, which we did, but unfortunately Steny decided not to run for governor, and he pulled out of the race. As a result of starting these businesses in Washington and Annapolis, I was invited to a meeting of a group of women in Washington. It's called the Capital Area Chapter. It's just one little chapter in Washington of women business owners, and these were wonderful, I mean, wonderful women. A lot of them were very involved in putting together the first White House conference on small business, women in business. And I was public information officer for 2 terms, just about the time that we decided to go national. And Edie Fraser, who was a dynamic PR woman in Washington, very friendly with Chuck Schumer, decided we'd have a meeting in New York. Well, of course, the New York women wanted New York to be the center, but the Washington women said, no, the action is on the Hill, because that's where you're dealing with the legislation impacting on small business. So we got the National Association of Women Business Owners established. The office is in Washington. We published the first national directory. Just about this time, I was invited to a meeting of the Finance Board of Directors of the Democratic National Committee. These were $5,000 donors, and I looked around the room and I didn't see any women. And I have a big mouth. When I went up to the chair of the party, I said, there are no women here. He said, women are not going to contribute $5,000 to the party. I said, well, Chuck, maybe not 5, I said, but I know women throughout the country that can give you $1,000, but, you know, we've got to deliver something to these women. He said, well, give me a proposal. So I did. I put in a proposal. I outlined exactly why we should target women, how we should target women, and what we should deliver to those women that we're targeting. So I was invited to speak before a group of women, and these were really high-powered ladies in Washington. I was a little shy at the time, but no one knew who I was, and to this day, no one still does. Because I have never sought publicity. Fundraisers tend to be background people. I made a pitch to this group of women, and they bought it, and then I was assigned staff at DNC. Landis Neal, head of the women's division. Her husband was a congressman, and also Carol Tucker Foreman became co-chair. She had been with the Carter administration, couldn't see her out again. And we started the Women's Council, and we traveled all over the country. It was very successful. All 12 congresswomen joined this council, and we did miraculously well in first year. Funny story, in 1982 at the midterm convention, we decided we'd throw a little reception for the women congresswomen. There were only 12 women congresswomen. These were Democrat, I don't know how many Republicans were. And we thought, oh, nobody's going to come, a few of us women in the congresswomen. But every presidential candidate showed up at that reception. And it was to honor the women congresswomen, so I didn't know what to do, because if we called them as presidential candidates, we never would have gotten through the program. So I had to go up to the mic and tell Kennedy and Glenn and Gary Hart and all the others that we would not call on them, because this was to honor the women, and if we called on them, they'd never get up. So basically, we had a very successful year. The following year, we published a newsletter. We were part of a national women's conference, a leadership conference, and I took the third day because it was a half day, and I thought, well, I can kind of hide. And, well, who did I get to not introduce again was Ted Kennedy, so the place was packed with press. Also, Pamela Harriman, once a year I would work with her in the National Governor's dinners, and she would also host receptions for us. So we had all the governor's wives, and made a speech to the governor's wives, and this little gal came up to talk to me, and she said, would you come to my state and make that speech? And I said, yes, I would. And then she left, and I said to her, who was that? He said, oh, that was the wife of the governor of Kansas. Her name was Karen Carlin. She became a member. I went to Kansas, and it was kind of funny. We had a luncheon at the governor's mansion with all her friends who were very prominent in Kansas politics and education. And it turned out that all of us had been born in the same month, and we were all Gemini. Anyway, and I also, in addition to raising, of course, money for the Democratic National Committee, I served on a lot of committees for governors and congressmen and senators. And during the '84 convention, when Geraldine Ferraro, how am I doing? 2 minutes, because she'll when Geraldine Ferraro was nominated to be vice president, they immediately said, we're going to have a meeting of the national fundraisers tomorrow. And we had that meeting. She walked in the room, walked immediately over to me, because I was the only one that she really knew in the fundraising community. Anyway, we became good friends. And I'm going to get off, and it's a pleasure to be old enough to be part of history.